Hello and welcome to today's daily news analysis, wherein we'll be discussing the Hindu newspaper and wherever required, we'll be referring to the PIBs for additional information, especially when we need the government related data. Now, one thing with the news analysis is, we are looking at the UPSC examination, we want to crack that. So, news analysis in isolation is not adequate. We need to have a sense of completion, and that completion will come when we are trying to identify the issues, we are trying to solve questions on those news events. So here, whenever I'm discussing those news events, I'll be sharing with you some mains-based questions which will give you a sense of completion on that particular topic. So this is not just your news analysis class, this is also your mains answer writing guidance class, or whatever you want to call it. Right. And yes, it goes without saying, wherever important, some points are there for prelims, some important facts are there, those will also be covered. Now coming to some important headlines. So, let me just give you a brief overview. So the first two that we are seeing over here we'll be just going into brief, where we just want brief idea, overview basically. And likewise at the end of it. These four that you can see, it is here that I have shared the mains-based questions where we'll be going more in a more comprehensive way, and we expect some questions. As we can see, UPSC asked us in the past years as well. In fact, I'll be sharing those questions. Right then, coming to the first one, that is about some trends associated with the COVID. Okay, so I think it's very obvious from the headline itself, 40% spike. So about 3.72 crore people are infected, 16.2 lakh active cases are there. We have some data about vaccination coverage. So it says the population above 18 plus, that is eligible population, of that 89.4% is vaccinated with single dose, and the rest with double dose is 64.4%. Right, that means there is greater immunity, and if more mutations take place, more variations are there, then again the economy will be able to resist a lockdown like situation. Right, so this is the main focus. Actually, we are concerned about this thing. Okay, now when we refer to these facts, these are India specific. Some states are performing well, some states are performing badly. So we have Punjab, Jharkhand, Manipur, etc., which lag behind with less than 50% of the eligible population that is covered with both doses. Right, that is bound to happen. Then we have an indicator known as positivity rate, which is at 19.29%. Basically, it's an indication of how fast the disease is spreading. So, normally it was around 1%. We normally have data about Delhi, so 1%, then it gradually increased to 5%, and now it is very high, 20%. It means that if 100 people are tested, so of these 100 people, 20 will turn out to be positive, 19.29 to be more precise. Right, so this is very high. Earlier it used to be around this much, 2-3 months back. Okay. Then we have some news about the unfortunate incident that had taken place, helicopter crash. So police is investigating the tri-service court of inquiry, which is looking into this thing. They are looking for more evidence, more conclusive evidence, so that they can come to a closure on this case. Then we have this incident of Djokovic, a very famous tennis player who had come to play in a tournament that takes place in Australia, known as Australian Open. The problem was that Djokovic was not vaccinated. So the documents that he gave to Australian authorities that he is not vaccinated, he is exempted. So those have not been accepted by the court, and he has been asked to leave the country. Right? So this is it actually. Okay, now is the main thing that we are here for. So first of all, we have this on Mondays, we have this edition in the Hindu newspaper, which is known as Education Plus, which talks about the education sector. So every week something or the other is there. Okay, so here this person who's writing it gives an interesting insight. It says, why can't we have a mix of arts and science subjects together? When we study, when we are in the schools, so after 10th, till 10th, everybody has similar subjects. Then 11th and 12th, we go in for specialization. We have streams. So for example, you may be science, and by science I mean engineering or medical. Then comes commerce. Broadly we have commerce, and then we have arts, humanities. Okay, so the person says that this is very restrictive. If we just have PCM, PCBM, and these, if the students are being prepared only in these streams, this is quite restrictive. So he makes a case as to why can't we have an integration of science and arts together, or at least some subjects of science and arts. So this will help inculcate, the science teaches us with the investigative skills, right? Critical thinking. So alongside that, arts like the knowledge of music, drama, whatever, that will help us hone soft skills. So soft skills, or it will help us hone not just the critical thinking part with the science and that stream provides us, but also with the imagination and the creativity that comes with arts. So imagination, and one of the problems that our science people have is they lack imagination and they lack soft skills, which is very, very important. They make a patent, but they don't know how to sell that patent or reach out to the mass public. So this will really help in benefiting the science sector of our country. So science and arts. And furthermore, this writer has given us with various famous personalities of the past, like Pythagoras, Einstein, who actually cultivated art. They were very knowledgeable. We have studied briefly of all the personalities. So, Einstein was a great pianist and violinist, and we all know how creative Einstein was. Likewise, Pythagoras' theorem is there. So Pythagoras himself was into music. Right? So this is the case that this thinker is making. The writer is making. Now furthermore, these are just 2 points, right? If let's say we have this question on policy as to why do we need to have a multidisciplinary approach, to read this question over here. Examine the prospects of interdisciplinary approach in higher education as envisaged in the new education policy. We'll come to this. Give suitable examples to justify your answer. So what are the prospects? What are the benefits? So here we have 2 benefits, but that is not adequate. There will be much more. So one more thing you can add is that it will help provide interdisciplinary applications. For example, science alone is not adequate. That is just physics, chemistry, maths. Maybe we can have the use of mathematics and its application in economics, or let's say we can look at biology and its application in agriculture, in genetically modified crops. And here again, the scientist or the scientific community needs to know the problem of a particular sector. They cannot be restricted to one's lab. They should know about the problems of the sector. They should know about the society, social issues that are there, social problems. And they must also know about how to reach out to that society, right? If we have greater clarity about a history, about a culture, then it will help reach out also, not just knowing the problem and identifying a problem and solving it, but also reach out and make it sellable. Whatever prospect is there, whatever thing has been developed should be sellable also. For example, if you look at the genetically modified crops, then one has to also look into the economic side of the farming sector. Okay, so we have this application. Now, if we look at history also, one may say that history is just knowing about the past. But what about carbon dating, radioactive dating of fossils, right? So again, we say science and history also together. So there is various applications we can look at. Furthermore, we can also say that the student, there is this very good line that I found on the news. The student has a choice to walk the path of knowledge. Walk the path of knowledge that they prefer. The student, given the choice that they have, if they can actually explore a particular stream outside, let's say they want to do engineering, but just giving them a choice with, let's say, history, geography, so they can know more about that particular field, and maybe who knows, they can actually pursue that line altogether in higher education. So that flexibility should be there, right? So these are some points. So these are the prospects. You have the famous thinkers also. I think you can quote these also. Now the thing is that if we have to write the answer, we have to start the question. We have to start our answer with the new education policy. So let's see what the new education policy says about it. So the new education policy had approved the multidisciplinary system in higher education. So that means, 10th, 11th, 12th for sure, but also at the higher education, so college, post-graduation, etc. Right? So in that also, that flexibility should be there. So that will help provide us with broad-based flexible learning. Student has a flexibility as to what they want to do, plus student has more array of options. Not, for example, a science student is not limited with physics, chemistry, maths, but can choose from other verticals also. Who knows, the person is interested in geology, or maybe interested in just economics in commerce, right? So just interested in economics, and can use science to solve the problems of economics. There is so much maths that goes in economics. So he's just interested in that. So that flexibility should be there. And one hurdle that is going to come in this is that we have, for example, for engineering, we have a regulator known as AICTE. For medical, we have a particular regulator. For arts, we have a particular regulator. So this will make it problematic. A particular subject is approved by a particular regulator but not by the other. So rather than this, having multiple regulator, there should be a single regulator known as the Higher Education Council of India. So this is proposed. Common single regulator for higher education. So this will help provide holistic and multidisciplinary education with flexibility. So this was said by HRD Secretary Amit Khare. Right? So you can quote this new education policy, then give the benefits, maybe a line or two on the challenges of, maybe there is a concern about practical side of things, as to, at present also we only had science and science or commerce. We have this limitation as there. So you can write a line or two and then conclude your answer. Right? Basic thing is that if a particular stream is taken, then will it be eligible if it is done in the early stage itself, 11th and 12th? Will it complicate the process with reference to the entrance exam of the colleges or your entry into a particular educational institution? So those hurdles are there, that everything has to be streamlined. So that problem is there. Anyways, but I have some example over here. I know few people from IIT. So, what they do is, they will do this computer science. They did computer science, and with that they did CFA. So this is a course on accountancy. So normally these computer science engineers, they want to go into the banking sector. So they do this course. So here again, interdisciplinary approach. Anyways, I think we're done with this question. And now moving on to Sri Narayan Guru. Okay, so what happens is that 26th of January, we have the Republic Day parade. And on this day, the culture and the heritage of India is shown. The heritage of the states are also shown regionally. So here the tableau of Sri Narayan Guru has not been taken into consideration for this year's Republic Day. Now, Sri Narayan Guru is a very, very important personality. He's mentioned in your GS1 syllabus also. He's there very prominently in the modern history, great social reformer, so very important personality, belonging from Kerala. So there is a political outcry, but that's it. For our exam point of view, we really need to know about Sri Narayan Guru and his contributions. And this is what we are going to focus now. Okay, so we expect a question on these lines, like write a brief note on the contributions of Sri Narayan Guru, or maybe in the ethics also, the ethical values from the teachings of Sri Narayan Guru, that could also be there. One second. Yeah. Okay. So let's see what Sri Narayan Guru, his contributions are. So first of all, we need to say that Sri Narayan Guru was born in Thiruvananthapuram in the year 1856. Thiruvananthapuram is Kerala, right? So he was born there, and he was a great social reformer and a prominent personality of the modern era. Okay, he stood up against the issue of caste-based discrimination that used to take place, and he stood up against, and he himself belonged to the Izava community, which was deemed as a varna, basically implying that it was from the lower caste or outcast basically. But eventually he came to be worshipped by everybody in the society. Okay, now Sri Narayan Guru, he said that in Malayali, he said, Oru Jati, Oru Matham, Oru Devam, Manusham. That means everybody is same. There is only one caste, there is only one religion, and there is only one God. That is humanity. And the God is in every one of us. That is what Sri Narayan Guru had said, that this discrimination should not take place. And one problem in that contemporary society was that people, especially from the lower caste, were not allowed to enter into the temple. Not just that, they were also not allowed to access the road that leads to the temple. So for this purpose, he organized the temple entry movement. He himself got constructed, the temple of Lord Shiva at Aruvipuram, so that people can go and worship who are not allowed in other temples. And at Kalavankode, right? Kalavankode, I think that's how it's pronounced. So here in this temple, this very interesting thing was that, whenever you go to the temple, you see the statue, you see the deity, or you see the statue where you worship, right? So here in this case, rather than the statue, there was the mirror. Rather than the deity, don't use the term statue, rather than the deity, there was mirror. So that means when one goes and sees, so one sees oneself only. Basically implies that the God resides within us, and we should look towards ourselves itself. So he kept mirrors instead of idols. Okay. He was against the idea of conversions, especially conversions of people from the lower caste. There is a tendency to lure people from the lower caste into a different religion, promising them a higher status, which normally does not take place. Okay, so this promise is done. So he said this is wrong to convert people on these grounds. And in fact, he also organized an all-religion conference in 1923. Which again he talked about the religious reforms, the social reforms, and yes, the issue of conversions as well. So he was against this. Further, for charitable work and philanthropy, he organized an organization known as Sri Narayan Dharma Paripalana Yogam. Right, so this organization was formed, and furthermore, his contributions to national movement is immense. Now, you may think that he was a social reformer, and he was just merely social reformer who was worshipped. But by being a social reformer, he advocated the unity of the people who are fighting on the basis of caste or maybe on the religion. In Kerala, there was an issue of the Malabar incidents also. So he advocated the unity, he advocated humanism. So when you advocate unity of the people, it also means unity of the nation. So he contributed to the national movement in that sense, and his various poems, his various writings also advocated unity. He also gave a lot of impetus to the Vaikom Satyagraha, a key incident that took place in South. Now Vaikom Satyagraha is also to do with the temple entry movement. Right? So here are some important contributions of Sri Narayan Guru, and try to write it in your own words. I have shared all the important points, and yes, just in case I didn't tell you, this is from the PIB. Okay, government talk on marital rape, a delaying tactic. Basically, there are people who filed a petition to the court on the subject of marital rape, which is basically implies a relationship between the husband and the wife. Naturally, there is an intimate relationship. So where a man forces the wife, there is a forced sexual intercourse, or without one's consent, without the consent of the wife. So when we look at the definition of the rape, when we look at the definition of rape according to the Indian Penal Code, marital rape, that is the rape, the forceful sexual intercourse between the husband and the wife, that is exempted. That is not defined as rape for the purpose of law. So in a way, this affects the dignity of the woman, right? It affects the dignity, it affects the equality also, where the woman is obviously at an inferior position, where the man is forcing onto the woman. And yes, it also affects the autonomy, where a person decides if she doesn't want to have the sexual intercourse, right? So this is, that autonomy is taken away where a man can force. So it affects the dignity, equality and autonomy, and one cannot even go to the police or to the court because it is exempted. So this is a problem. So the petition is filed to the court that please remove this exception and criminalize marital rape, right? And the punishment for the rape, some provisions are there over here, you can note this. So we have the section 376 which provides for punishment under the Indian Penal Code for rape, and the rape is defined in section 375 of IPC. Clear? Okay, so this is it actually. This is the main issue. Now let me tell you what happened in the news. So when the petition was filed in the court naturally approached the government as to what are your views. Ultimately, government may also suggest making a change to the law by means of parliament. So government's view are taken into account. Government says that please halt it, don't move ahead with this thing, because we are trying to build consensus. We are taking the viewpoint of the chief ministers of various states. Now petitioner says that, see, we do not believe in the government and government is not serious. Even in the past, like the women reservation bill, it took 25 years. Still now it has not passed. So such things, government, we cannot be relied upon. And furthermore, it is about the dignity, equality and autonomy of the women, which basically implies 50% of the population, right? So basically the petitioners are telling the courts that you please strike this provision as being unconstitutional. Okay, so this is it. Now let's come to the question and we'll continue with the analysis. So the question says the marital rape exception to the definition of rape is antithetical to women's dignity, equality and autonomy. I think furthermore you can add one more question where we are looking at the feasibility of or the issues and concerns associated with criminalization of marital rape, right? So take this issue into account also, because that is one objection that the government had expressed, the Home Minister, I remember, had expressed with reference to criminalizing marital rape. One concern is that this is about the relationship between the husband and wife, and it is intimate also. So here again, to prove rape, the issue of proving the rape, and it may also lead to frivolous cases. The concerns, frivolous cases, it may affect the sanctity of the marriage. It may lead to high divorce rates. So these are certain concerns that have to be mentioned if you're looking at this aspect. Then you have to also express the issue of the dignity, equality, autonomy. Okay, I'm missing one thing over here. The marital rape exception to the definition. Yeah. I think we have covered every way basically. So when you write an answer, when you're writing the question, you can start your answer by maybe mentioning a fact, NCRB data, or directly coming to the clause of section 375, or maybe some incident about the petition. Then mention the concerns about dignity, equality, autonomy. Then if you're looking at the feasibility question, then about the concerns expressed like frivolous petitions, sanctity of the marriage, high divorce rates. And then you can make out a case as to why this should be there, it should be criminalized, and please go by this only because it reflects different values altogether of yours. Okay. Now here you can give the points of the views of the various committees on marital rape. So two big committees of the parliament, two big committees in the past have said that the marital rape should be criminalized. So you have one point over here. And the J.S. Verma committee, after the Nirbhaya case, the J.S. Verma committee was constituted, which was to reform the criminal law to deal with the issue of sexual harassment. So very, very important judgment. Again, from prelims point of view, again a question can be asked as to which of the following are associated with the issues of sexual harassment. And so in this, names of various committees could be there. Okay, so we have the J.S. Verma committee, which said that the marital rape should be criminalized, right? So this protection should be taken away. So this is what they had said. So you can conclude by mentioning the views of these committees. This question will be 250 words. SC verdicts have flagged the threat of hate speech. This was a past year question that was asked in 2009. Okay. So basically, this incident had taken place in Haridwar recently, where certain people had engaged in hate speech. Hate speech is basically punishable. Hate speech is something that creates enmity, that incites violence, right? So such things come under hate speech, basically. Okay, so with reference to the Haridwar, or with reference to the Delhi Citizenship Amendment, that protest was going on. So with reference to that, hate speech have been in the news in the recent times. Now this is not really a news event, but it's basically the views of the Supreme Court, or views of the newspaper, where it is saying that the Supreme Court verdicts have flagged the threat of hate speech in the past. So basically it says that, when somebody engages in hate speech, in a country we have let me just explain from the constitutional point of view, we have the right to freely we have the right to free speech and express ourselves, but that comes with reasonable restrictions. That comes with reasonable restrictions. That thus includes, if you look at Article 19(2), if you just Google, you will find hate speech outraging the modesty of the woman as certain clauses. Okay, so such hate speech, it comes under reasonable restrictions, and it has the potential of, it attacks the unity and the integrity of the country. How? There are people of diverse nature in the country, based on religion, based on region, caste, right? So there are people of different groups, ideas, etc. There are different communities. So when a particular community, people of a particular community target the other, so that means there is communalization taking place, there is divisiveness taking place, me against you, we against you, for instance. So this affects divisiveness, this leads to tensions, this leads to polarization, and in a way it reflects that I versus you rather than we approach or us approach. So this affects the unity and integrity of the nation. It leads to divisiveness, it leads to violence, hatred, etc. So this was mentioned in a Supreme Court case in 2020 known as Amish Devgan case. And furthermore it said that it affects people who are being targeted, it affects their dignity. It affects their dignity. So the concept of dignity is further elaborated in this over here. So dignity, it says, is the basic entitlement that a member of a society has, basically. Basic entitlement, that basically means having equal constitutional rights, having right to reputation, self-respect. So those things are part of the definition of dignity. So when one is targeted, their dignity is affected. So we have the Amish Devgan case. We can also refer to the case on constitutional morality, right? So these are certain ways where you can point out. Okay, now let's come to the question, and purposefully I have shared this question. There are various questions on Article 19. UPSC frequently asks that. So here is this question which says, as we live in a plural society, we need the greatest freedom to express our opinions even if others find it offensive. Do you agree? Now you can start your answer by stating the views on Article 19 and Article 19(2), reasonable restrictions. But yes, as far as possible, greatest freedom should be provided. But that greatest freedom may also be very offensive. For example, the Haridwar incident that took place, which incites violence, hate amongst the different communities. So that is there. So there is one side, one is this thing. The other one distinction that needs to be there is, what is offensive could also be something that is critical of the government. So we're looking at dissent, political dissent. We are looking at a comedian making a joke, Kiku Sharda case. Kiku Sharda, the comedian in the Kapil Sharma show. So a comedian mocking a politician, so he was arrested for that, Kiku Sharda case. Then a cartoonist, Aseem Trivedi case, who made a caricature on Mamata Banerjee, so she got him arrested. So somebody who's critical of corruption, who brings about some issues with the society, some wrongs that are taking place, so even those are offensive. But here that distinction needs to be made, that which is which can be permitted, which cannot be permitted. So this distinction has to come very clearly in your answer. Discuss with reference to some recent incidents in the Indian context. I think I've given that context also. So we have this issue of this examples that I shared over here, and ones which try to incite violence and hatred. Right. Now coming to this world news, very briefly I'll be covering it. So one issue was there in the US, Texas, where in a Jewish synagogue is something like a temple. So there was a hostage-like situation. People with guns had come and they had taken people into hostage. So US military came into action, and as a result of this, the terrorist was killed. Okay, so this incident had taken place. Now it's quite likely that we are going to have this topic of arms. The arms law in US, as well as we may have this issue of privacy versus public safety. Normally these issues follow after such incidents, where the police or the FBI wants data from the mobile phone, and Apple or whichever company's phone they were using, they say that on the grounds of privacy we cannot divulge the information, and the FBI says for public safety we want that data. Beijing Olympics, before the Beijing Olympics, Omicron case seen in China, so this is a matter of concern. Then comes a volcano caused significant damage in a place known as Tonga. Now your homework assignment, that you need to identify where Tonga is on the map, because this will help you with your map based questions that can be asked in prelims, right? So you need to know where is Tonga. Mains based question could be as to what are the reasons for genesis of a tsunami. So there was a tsunami basically because an underwater eruption, volcano activity took place, so that affected the flow of the sea, and it led to the displacement of the seawater, and therefore there was the tsunami. So that question could be there. Right then, so this is it from my side. So this basically concludes our newspaper analysis, and I want you to write these answers, and this will give you a lot of good practice and exam centric practice for your exams. This is it. Bye bye, take care, and all the best.